Alright, Trajanus here. Time for another Full House game. This is the 6th iteration, and you know I jumped on this one early because I'm playing my favorite nation in all of Dominions, Early Age Ermor. This is the lesser known Ermor. Usually when people think Ermor, they think Middle Age, when everything has gone wrong and everyone's dead, which is an interesting nation, but you know, not who we're playing here. This is the Early Age when things are still going well. I love Roman history, so these guys are based on the Romans. Should be no surprise that they're my favorite nation. They're not the strongest nation in Dominions, definitely. I think, you know, there's a couple of issues. They're a human nation. You know, a lot of people will tell you, like, just don't bother if it's a human nation. To an extent, all human nations struggle in the late game because, you know, they're just very vulnerable to strategic like kill spells and stuff, so they, you know, their mages just tend to die, and in battle too they die often, and then that's an issue, absolutely. They're also a fire nation, you know, and people will tell you that fire magic sucks, which I don't really agree with, but you know, it has its issues, of course. You know, rain is notorious, which is not as bad as it sounds, I think. So, you know, human and fire, right, must be worthless. But I disagree, and I don't think Ermor is not seen as a weak nation either. I think, you know, they're seen as sort of a good nation, which is probably fair. So, yeah, we'll see what we can do with them. I'm going to go through, you know, just sort of a general overview relatively quickly. I think, you know, there's some good overviews out there already. I don't think I have a ton to add, even though they are my favorite nation. I'm still not great at this game and not great at Ermor. And, you know, we'll talk about my build, which definitely has issues. But anyway, without further ado, let's get into Ermor. So they have all paths, which is cool, except blood. No blood, which is fine. I hate blood hunting. Anyway, so, and they have astral and death, so they have late game options, absolutely. You know, I'm sure there's ways that they can get into blood. This is a little deceptive, though, you know, all paths, because, yeah, primarily fire, death, and astral, and this is very much true. So the other paths, like the non-fire elemental paths, they kind of get, right? So they have, well, let's talk about probably my least favorite units in their lineup first. So the Flamen and the Pontifex. So yeah, the Flamen is really like who you're talking about when you're talking about this extra path access. And both of these guys, they are foreign recruit, right? So they can be recruited only in non-fort provinces, which is really annoying. So even though, you know, these guys are only 2 recruitment points, they're slow to recruit, right? Because you only get 1 recruitment point without an upgraded fort, and you can't recruit them in forts. In addition, they're priests, right? So you need a lab and a temple that's not in a fort, and I hate having unforted temples. Unforted labs are also not ideal, but unforted temples are just so, you know, attractive to knock down, and just, yeah, very vulnerable to raiding. Raiding and anti-raiding is probably not Ermor's strongest, you know, suit anyway. So anyway, yeah, I don't really focus on these guys too much, but I mean, they are your only access into a lot of paths. I mean, really just like nature, earth, and water, which, you know, Earth is definitely useful. I mean, these are all useful paths. I think every path of magic is useful. So they're definitely something you should consider. You know, if you just have like even just one province, like, you know, popping these guys out. Now, of course, I mean, this is a random, right? And it's random across a lot of different paths. And you already have air on other, you know, units, and you already have fire. You have a lot of fire. So, like, you know, of course, you know, these guys are going to random into like 2 fire, and it's like, great, you know, this is a waste of a Flamen. And it'll take you a second, you know, to actually get, you know, the randoms that you want, and you're just never going to have a lot of mages, you know, even if you're, you know, have 1 province, or maybe even, God forbid, 2 provinces popping these guys out. You know, the odds that you're going to have a lot of like nature, earth, or water mages is very low. So like, yeah, you have a little bit of access to these paths, but like not really. And I honestly kind of just try to skip these guys, because you can sort of fix your access a bit with your pretender. But, you know, if you don't want to go that way, if you don't want to play a rainbow or something like that, Flamens are out there. They're not like the worst mages. They're just annoying to recruit. And then the Pontifex don't bother. They're a holy 2, but Ermor priest is not a problem for them. Fire 1, whatever. These guys just aren't worth it because they're only foreign recruits. So I would say just don't even bother with those guys. So anyway, that's kind of the somewhat we'll talk about the rest of the path access in a second. But yeah, they are. Magic diversity is a problem for them, even though it says that you're actually quite diverse. It's kind of. From a unit standpoint, I'd say they're better than average. So one of the favorite things, and probably the main thing I have to add in terms of talking about Ermor, is their movement possibilities. So they have infantry that has 18 map move, which is kind of not unheard of for infantry, but very rare. And so they can actually build, armies where they can multi-move, entire stacks pretty easily, as long as you're moving through, non-difficult terrain, right? So they struggle in wastelands, forests, mountains or highlands. Stuff like that is that's going to constrain your movement, but as long as you're in, plains and stuff like that, you're going to be moving really fast. And you can absolutely surprise people with this, because usually, you see a big stack of infantry and human infantry, and generally that's going to move 1 square a turn. But that is absolutely not the case with early age Ermor's armies. You can absolutely build them to be multi-move, have an entire stack move really rapidly, which I think is really cool and definitely thematic. So there are plenty of units in the lineup that break this. So just going through the lineup in general, you have slingers. They do break the map move rule. Slingers, obviously they're not very good. They don't deal a lot of damage. A lot of people don't really like them. They have problems for sure. They're very cheap. You can just pump out a ton of slingers. They're not bad for siege strength, right? They're absolutely bog standard human siege strength, but they're cheaper than normal, and you can just poop them out real quick. So they have terrible morale. Their stats are really bad. You are a nation with a lot of fire, so flaming arrows is an option, and slingers pump out a ton of projectiles because you can have a bunch of them, and you actually have more ammunition than normal archers. So as long as you're not up against something that's really heavily armored or has fire resistance, putting flaming arrows on a ton of slingers can be really, really good. And you have some air, so you can do stuff like wind guide, and so are slingers great? No. But should you never recruit them? I don't think so. I think they definitely have value in places, if you want to turn gold into siege strength, or it's a situation where a bunch of ranged units with flaming arrows is going to make a big difference. But you do sacrifice the map move that I was talking about. So you definitely have to think about, you don't always want slingers. So yeah, the ascensus, hopefully. I don't actually speak Latin. I don't like these guys. I don't know. They're cheaper, right? They have one of the things about Ermor, right? They get the tower shield, which improves their defense skill. So, these guys tend to last in melee a little longer than, a lot of other militia troops. But, they have really low morale. Their skills suck, and they only have map move 14, right? So, they have javelins, but you're Ermor, right? You're the Romans. You have lots of javelins. Don't worry about javelins. So I'd say don't bother with these guys. The gladiators, are pretty well known. They're interesting units. They're good. They're really kind of more emergency or deterrent troops, right? Because their deal is if they hit an enemy in combat or they receive a hit in combat, then that's it. After the combat's over, they disappear as though they died. So they're kind of single-use troops, but they are really good. They're pretty easy to pump out, because really low resource cost, pretty low recruitment point cost, average gold cost. So in an emergency, you can pop these guys out really quickly, for both varieties. Both varieties have their uses. I mean, this guy has a net and a piercing trident with a lot of damage. That's kind of one of the, they have better than average strength for humans and damaging weapons and decent skills. So for the gold and especially the resource and recruitment points, these guys are, they punch way above their weight. So yeah, and netting guys, I think you can only use it. yeah, size 3, 4 has a chance to negate, and then you can't really use it on size 5 and 6. So, you're not going to be netting like Neefle giants, right? But, against elves, right? Like netting elves is great. Anything that relies on defense, like, yeah, these nets can be really, really useful. And, the trident does a lot of damage. So, like, yeah, this variety is good. This variety is maybe arguably better. Like, the flail does quite a bit of damage as well. It's not pierce, so against heavy armor, it might struggle a little bit, but they get 2 attacks versus a shield. And they're really damaging attacks, so these guys can really like pump out the damage, and their protection is not bad either, right? Protection 12 it's okay, so anyway, like, yeah, these guys are kind of a great emergency button. Somebody attacks you in a place you aren't expecting. They're also pretty good, like at least anti-thug, maybe even arguably anti-super combatant. One of the classic things is to put like body ethereal and luck on these guys, just point buff them a bunch, and yeah, they get really scary. So you're not going to rely on these guys a ton, right? Because they disappear, so it's not really like a cost-effective troop in terms of like long-term usage. But yeah, as an emergency button or like for specific use cases, absolutely worth it, and a useful thing to have. You can also expand with them. I don't love gladiator expansion myself, because it just leaves you with like pretty much it's obviously like very high attrition because they keep disappearing, so you kind of finish expansion without much of a military, I feel like, usually. So definitely in certain cases, like tougher indie types, it might be worth mixing a few in. I don't think, like, anyway, it can work. It's not my favorite thing, but yeah, anyway, you can expand with these guys, but you have lots of expansion options. So yeah, I don't know, I don't love it. So the leve, I like this guy. He's cheap, not so much gold wise, but like resource and recruitment. You can get quite a few of them. Gold cost is average, morale is average. Like, he's not great. His shield's a little smaller, so his defense isn't quite as good. This is sort of like your cheaper like skirmisher option. He has a javelin like most of Ermor's troops, maybe all of them. The gladiators don't have javelins. But yeah, he has map move 18, right? So he slots into the army just fine. So, I kind of use this as like the cheaper option, maybe for raiding, or just to, bulk out your army. Like, obviously, like, his siege strength is like fine, it's normal human. So yeah, he's nothing to write home about, but solid, I would say. I'm not even gonna bother. Anyway, these guys, map move 18, right? So like, it's fine, but it's kind of like, I don't know, resource cost is now like approaching like the same level as the hostati. So yeah, it's kind of like, I don't really see, I guess, if you're in a place where you have like high resources and low recruitment, it just, yeah, pretty like average skills. He's a spear, right? So, he does get pierce damage, which is kind of cool, but your hostati also get the chance for pierce. I think he probably has a little higher damage. No, not even. So yeah, I mean, he has map move 18, like I said, so you could recruit him, I guess, but I don't really see the reason. So yeah. And then there's the lizards. So yeah, like they're kind of in a weird spot. I don't really use them a lot myself, but you certainly could. They obviously have the cold-blooded issue, although usually as early age Ermor, you're going to be wanting to take heat, so that's not so much of an issue, at least like defensively. Obviously on the offense, if you're going into cold Dominion, these guys are really going to struggle, but they are poison resistant, which is nice, because I mean, foul vapors is definitely something that people can do to you, as a human nation that wants to generally have like fairly large armies of just regular human troops. Foul vapors is probably something you're going to see, and these guys are definitely resistant to it. They can swim, which is kind of interesting, like swamp survival. They have a few interesting tags. Kind of hard for you to take advantage of this because you don't really have commanders. I don't think you get a lizard commander. Yeah, we don't let the lizards lead anybody. So you don't really have a commander that can take advantage of this. Maybe through some summoning or indies or whatever. You could figure out a way for sure, and maybe surprise some people. But I just think that cold-blooded is a bad enough tag, and they have kind of lower morale. Resource and recruitment point cost is not too bad. Protection is decent. I think they get some natural protection. Which is kind of nice. Although it does mean that they don't buff like quite as well. But their armor is not terrible or anything. Like, yeah, there's nothing wrong with these guys other than like the cold-blooded issue. So it's if you're going to be taking them into cold, then it's kind of like, well, your other infantry is just as good, basically. Why not just have those? But, if you are worried about, poison resistance, or God forbid, you want to do some foul vapors stuff, which you can actually do, kind of. It's an option, so it's cool to have it. Map move, very slow, so that's a problem. And then the Ostati I think is really gonna make up the bulk of your troops. Some people argue for the Principe. The main problem I have is just that they also have really high recruitment point. This is pretty high recruitment point cost and more gold cost. And you don't really get that much more out of it. And then they don't have 18 map move, so they're gonna slow down your armies, which so I just think that there's enough arguments against these guys. I wouldn't really bother. They do have slightly higher protection, but slightly higher skills. But I just think Ostati are the way to go. Slightly better than average morale. Really nothing to write home about in a lot of ways. Just with the tower shield, right, and that's true of most of the Ermorian troops, they just get really high defense skill, and arrows and projectiles and stuff are way less of an issue for you. These guys will hold the line for a long time. They do have higher than average resource cost, higher than average recruitment cost. Early Age Ermor is absolutely a nation that you want at least some scales on, I would say. Full scales, no nation ever hates full scales. But you could absolutely make an argument for going full scales on Early Age Ermor. And this is part of it. They get a short sword, so damage output can be a bit of an issue. They just have human level strength, so they do get the chance to do pierce damage with the short sword, which is nice. Helps punch through armor, but 15 damage, isn't that much. So they're pretty good at holding the line, but in terms of doing damage, can be a little problematic, especially as the game goes later. These guys, I wouldn't really rely on them to be your damage dealers. The javelin is really nice, so again, flaming arrows works on javelins as well. You're gonna have a lot of javelins as Early Age Ermor. But I think this is gonna make up the majority of your armies. Certainly, it makes up the majority of my armies as Early Age Ermor. And then we talked about the Principe, the Triarii. They got done dirty in Dominions 5. So they're awful. They're kind of notorious for being awful. One of the main issues is this encumbrance is just absolutely ridiculous. So it's they're gonna swing 10 times roughly, and then they're gonna fall asleep. Even outside of any fatigue plays or anything like that. So it's just not worth it. They're also super intensive for resources and recruitments. You can't get that many of them. Decently high gold cost, and you're not really getting the good protection, right? And formation fighter, which is kind of cool. So the protection, the formation fighter is cool. They do get a long spear, so repels are on the table for them, but they're old, right? So they just their stats are worse, and they're gonna start to pick up afflictions and stuff. It's just having old age troops is really rough. So, I don't know. Maybe there's a use for them, but I just tend to not recruit these guys because, they're just going to fall asleep. And then, of course, map move is a problem for them. And then, standards, and they just provide a morale bonus to a squad. So, I get a decent amount of standards. There's really no reason not to have a standard in each one of your squads. They have map move 18, so, very happy about that. Otherwise, they're basically just kind of an Ostati. You're not going to recruit them in great numbers. I actually like to use these guys as bodyguards because, it's always annoying when your standard dies, and you're on the offensive, and it's just now that squad doesn't have morale, and then you get shuffle more standards forward. So it's I just throw extra standards on some important mages and priests and etc. As bodyguards, and then as standards die out in the field, then I can just pull a bodyguard off and slot it in. So anyway, that's something I don't see as much. Plus then it looks cool too because you have a bunch of standards around your commanders, so extra bonus. And then they get a cavalry that's decent to Equite. It's a decent medium heavy cav. The protection is not great, defense is solid, attack skill not fantastic, high recruitment point, which is normal for cavalry. Map move 18, which is nice. Gold cost. I don't know. I don't get a lot of these guys, but there's nothing wrong with them. you certainly could recruit them, and it's not. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with them. The main reason that I don't really recruit them is because I rely on the sacreds. So this is Ermor sacred cavalry. They're really good. They're not like amazing. They don't really warrant like a hell bless or anything like that. But like I do think they're strong enough that like even if you're trying to focus on scales, it's probably still worth picking up something for these guys. Because they're just really solid. So they get 2 attacks, like all normal cavalry. They get a lance charge, which is nice. Well, I don't know about all cavalry, but most cavalry get a hoof attack, which is their second attack in combat. They only get to use the lance once, of course. They have recuperation, which is actually like really nice. So it just heals. They heal afflictions. So, you pick up afflictions like on your units all the time. And so for your more valuable sacreds, it's really nice that this is just built in. They have really high defense, which is normal for cavalry, but this is, higher than normal. Some of that is because their protection isn't as fantastic as a lot of like, heavy cavalry. These guys are really more like, I guess, kind of medium to heavy cavalry. So yeah, their protection is not amazing, but it's the early age, so protection values just tend to be lower. Like you don't have to worry about crossbows. Yeah, this is totally respectable protection, but it is something to consider. Hit points pretty humanish, strength pretty human level. They are expensive, right? Like they're a cavalry. They're not insanely expensive, but yeah, they're not cheap. And then map move 18. So anyway, these guys they're really good. Definitely you can kind of build the nation around these guys as well to an extent, right? They do suffer, of course, from the fact that they're capital only, right? Like most sacreds. So in terms of like scaling, like these guys aren't going to go completely nuts because you're always going to have a limited amount of them, but they can do a lot of work for you. And this is your other like you can expand. You can do the gladiator expansion. You can just do the regular like Roman expansion. Like honestly, like the leves expand fine. High attrition because they have pretty low protection. You could expand with other stuff too. You expand with hostility, so you can just go with like Roman troops expand pretty well, especially in the early age, because javelins are really strong against most independent types. So you have the gladiator option, just regular Roman expansion, like kind of scales expansion, and then the equite also expand just fine, as long as you have a decent bless. So that's the unit lineup. Like I said, I think the main thing for me is focusing on that map move 18. I think there's definitely, you do have to work for it. And we'll talk about why you have to work for it, but a solid unit lineup, like better than average, definitely, with a good sacred. So in terms of commanders, you get a scout. Not much to say there. It is nice having a scout. There are a few nations that you can't actually recruit scouts out of their forts. Ouch. You get an assassin, which is kind of interesting. Another expansion option, actually. Assassin expansion is kind of unreliable and not fantastic, so probably not something that you should focus on or rely on. I think I actually maybe do a little bit of that in this game. I do like to get a couple of assassins early. They are a bit expensive, but they're certainly cheaper than mages. I should double check. I think they're cheaper than mages. Yeah, just barely. You get a cheap mage here, but anyway, they are a little expensive. You can use them as scouts. They're more stealthy than normal scouts, but it's not worth it because of how much more expensive they are. In terms of actually using them as assassins, like I'm still trying to figure it out a bit. Like they're just a regular human, right? They do get a poison dagger. So strong poison, if they can poison guys, like they can definitely assassinate humans. They're going to really struggle against mages or like elves or giants. Like, if it's anything special, like forget it. Don't even bother sending these guys unkitted. Like you can kit them. Where the efficient price point is in terms of like how much gem expenditure to use. I mean, they can carry water bottles, like that's kind of the standard thing, which just summons a water elemental, and water elementals are really dangerous. So it's a useful thing for you to have. It's something that people have to think about, and if they don't prepare for, you can really mess them up. So just having access to a recruitable assassin chassis is really nice. They're only recruitment 0.1, so you can pump out quite a few of these guys. And if people aren't ready for it, and you have a decent build for it, they can do work for you, but you're probably not going to rely on them a ton because, again, they're going to really struggle against, mages and a lot of tougher targets, but useful thing to have available to you. The Centurion is a fantastic leader. He's pretty cheap, 70 gold, and he has like full like leadership, if you will. So, he can do all the formations and he gives a bonus to morale. Centurions are great. There's not much to them. Wouldn't thug them or anything like that. But as in terms of leading your forces around, also map move 18. Like these guys are solid. The Legatus? I don't know. Anyway, this guy, 2 recruitment points, which is, a little rough. He's going to take a full fort turn, and you're only going to get 1. He's more expensive. High leadership, so he's going to give an additional, like, morale bonus. Otherwise, kind of, again, it wouldn't bother thugging this guy or anything like that. But, he's going to be solid for your main armies. If you have a big army, you might as well grab one of these guys and, put everything on him. So, you're not going to pump out, like, a ton of these guys, versus, like, the Centurions. But like still a nice thing to have, like that 120 leadership is like a cool thing, especially when you stack it up, with standards and etc. A couple morale boosting items, like you can get Ostati, up to 16, 17, 18 morale easily, especially if they have some experience. Nice thing to have. You have an Acolyte, wouldn't bother. He's a priest. I don't even know if he's cheaper than an independent priest. Probably, but anyway, he's just a holy one. Like, I guess if you really need a priest, go for it, I guess, but you have better options for priests, I would say, generally speaking. So he's there, you have him, it's fine. Augers, so this is kind of one of your main mages. This guy's really solid. Fire 1, Astral 1, like anytime you have a cheap astral mage, like that's really nice because they can just communion up, so you have access to like basically all astral spells, all fire spells in battle. He researches at a pretty decent rate. This is definitely an argument for taking like heavy magic scales, and he's also a fortune teller, pretty strong fortune teller. And so that's an argument for taking Misfortune with Ermor, which is probably something you're going to want to do because you want scales in other places, and then you need some diversity, and then you want a bit of a bless. This helps a lot in terms of preventing your labs from burning down and things like that. Nice that he's a fortune teller, and just all around like a really solid mage. If you're gonna go up against early age Ermor, you're gonna see plenty of these guys in all likelihood. The Auger Elder, which is arguably like the strongest feature of this nation. He has some problems, kind of in a lot of the problem, right? He's just a human. He's such an old man. He starts at like 60, and then old age is like 46, but that tends to get reduced even farther, right? Because he can random like some more fire. He's a fire mage, so age is like a big problem, although Ermor definitely has some ways to mitigate that. 210 gold, and he gets a ton. He's a really powerful mage, right? So he's astral, so he can communion up, and he can get supported by the augurs, right? So you can boost these guys' paths just absolutely sky high if you want to. Communion fatigue can be a bit of an issue, right? Because he's got off path so he's got death, which obviously the augurs don't have, and then he can also random into some air, which the augurs also don't have. So burning out communions is definitely a concern, with early age Ermor. But because you have death and because you have air and you can communion them up, even though like your air access is pretty much always just going to be 1, theoretically you could get that the 2, but don't worry about that. It's unlikely to happen. But because you can communion them, pretty much all like air and death battle magic is available to you, which is really nice. And then of course he gets the air death cross path, which you're not going to get a ton of, right? Like 25% of these guys are going to have some air, and you're going to get the air death cross path because they always have death, but you get some really powerful spells in that cross path. Wailing Winds is kind of the big one, but you also get like Wind of Death. Banefire is also an option for these guys. yeah, there's some really powerful spells that these guys get, and then they're not that expensive for how many paths that you get, right? Like this is as always a 6-path mage, and it's only 210 gold. So it's just the downside is like, yeah, they got 9 hit points, so, and they're old, so everything's gonna kill them. They don't have map move 18. And neither do the augers. The augers are a little closer at 16, so like your mage balls are going to going to negate the advantage of that the speed that I was talking about with your infantry. Now obviously if you give these guys mobility items, and then the other thing you can do with these guys is you can twice born them, and then they'll come back as white mages, in which case they'll actually have greater than 18 map moves. So like there are ways to get at least not a huge mage ball, but if you focus on it, you can absolutely like have a mobile communion that's going to move at the same speed, if not faster, than your infantry. And so you can actually have like a full army with full infantry support, your cavalry and your magic, that's going to be really speedy. Like you can absolutely catch people off guard with that, as long as you're not trying to move through like rough terrain. Although honestly, even through rough terrain sometimes it's like you'll be able to, if you own like a swamp, and you have like plains on either side, you'll be able to move through that swamp, and do a 2-province move in one turn, which can really catch people off guard. So I do think that's worth considering. It's not a make or break feature, but yeah, that's definitely something I like to mess around with. But anyway, yeah, these guys are really powerful, and then of course, and they're fortune tellers as well, which is nice. But the most powerful thing about these guys, which I haven't mentioned yet, they recruit anywhere, right? Like this is, somebody you might expect would be a capital only mage. Not the case. Now they are slow to recruit, right? So it's going to take you a little longer to pump them out, but if you get a lot of infrastructure out, like you can recruit these guys in every fort, assuming you have the money, right? They're not cheap, they're not sacred, right? So upkeep can be a bit of a problem for these guys. Like it's not insane, but it's not cheap either. Another reason that like twice borning can be really nice. Because then once they turn into white mages, no upkeep, right? So that's definitely a consideration with these guys. They can all twice born. You need 2 death for that. So yeah, really powerful mage. And then in terms of cap only, the only cap only commanders that you have are your priests. And so yeah, these guys are really useful. Priest level 2, not a bad thing. They have recuperation, but the biggest thing that you're going to want these guys for is that they have healer, which is a rare ability and really useful. You can do this, like you can use them on like Tartarians and stuff like that, or just, more mundanely and normally, right? Like these guys are old, they're going to pick up afflictions, but, you can keep them healthy, with your healers. And I say healers because, so you have this guy, he's not slow to recruit, which is his main strength. And this is probably going to be the guy that you're going to lead Equite, like your sacred expansion parties with, because you don't really have any other like priest. I mean, I guess you could do these guys, but and they do have leadership, but it's just like you could get 2 of these guys, but anyway, these guys are much more useful because of the healer. So anyway, you'll probably want to lead your sacred expansion parties with these guys, but then you also have recruitable holy threes, which is just a really useful thing to have. Makes throne rushing much easier, throne claims much easier. They are also healers, right? They are old, which is a little bit sad, but again, you have healers, so it's not a big deal. They are slow to recruit, and they're not cheap, so you're not going to want a ton of these guys. Usually I aim for about like 1 per army, because it's really nice to have that divine blessing to make sure all your Equite, the sacred shroud, get blessed up, and then you have a decent amount of them for throne claims and etc. So yeah, I think that more or less covers it. Yeah, we should talk gem income. So it's split between fire and astral. And that is a little problematic. I talked about like twice borning these guys and stuff like that, and you do have a lot of death access, but you do not have any death income out of your capital whatsoever. So, as is appropriate, you kind of hunger for death gems. You're going to want to get out and site search, earlier rather than later for death. And of course, just with the way that, sites, like you can't guarantee that you're going to get any death at all. So, and you don't really have any thug chassis like whatsoever, right? Like no thug chassis, and you can bring in some thug chassis, but you're pretty much mostly going to be looking at death. You can get Banes and Bane Lords, and then later eventually like Wraith Lords, but it's like you don't have any guaranteed death income, so it's just, so in terms of like twice spawning these guys, there's definitely an argument to not do that, because it's not cheap. It's 10 death gems per caster to do that, and you have no guaranteed death income. You can at least site search for it pretty effectively, but yeah, it's a problem, right? So you only, it's like fire, you can count on fire and you can count on astral, and then the only other thing I'll say in terms of your access is that like say primarily like fire, death, astral, but like your astral is actually pretty shallow, which is not really something that I don't know, it didn't jump out at me immediately, because you just, with your battle magic, right, it's like all your guys have astral, right? It's like these guys all have astral, these guys all have astral. I mean, we don't really talk about these guys, but anyway, like pretty much the majority of the mages you're going to be recruiting like have astral, so it does kind of feel like you have pretty good astral access. But you max out more or less at Astral 2, right? Yeah, theoretically you get an Astral 3, but don't count on that. And even the Astral 2s are actually like pretty rare. I mean, not pretty rare, but I mean, it does depend like what luck you get in terms of these random rolls, right? So you only have a 25% chance, with each one of these guys, more or less, to be at Astral 2, right? Slightly higher because the 10%, but anyway, so it's like you're gonna be looking at like a couple Astral 2s, which is not super high astral access, right? Whereas you're gonna have quite a few fire 3s running around, you're gonna have death 3s running around, especially if you do twice borning. You might even have a few death 4s, because when you die and come back, you have a chance at getting some more death magic. So you have better access into fire and death as compared to astral. So some of the astral things are a little tougher for early age Ermor to do. So you have excellent battle magic, but in terms of rituals and on the strategic map, sometimes you can struggle a little bit, even in the paths that you were mostly just astral, right? That you do have a lot of, but it's kind of shallow access. And then of course, like, you have a lot of death, but like you have no native death income, so that can be a bit awkward. So yeah, I think that's kind of my thoughts on early age Ermor. I think they're a solid nation. They have their issues, but they definitely have plenty of strengths. And yeah, I think they can absolutely win games. And this is what we'll be doing with early age Ermor. So yeah, this is it's not the best build, absolutely. This is definitely my own build, which is nice. This is mostly what I came up with from a lot of single player. This kind of really like predates my multiplayer experience. So I just kind of wanted to bring it in and see how it went. It has problems for sure. So we're going with the Divine Emperor. Because it's a Ermor only chassis. I think a few other Roman nations do get it. I think Pythium in the Middle Age and etc. But anyway, it's kind of an interesting chassis. He's a rainbow chassis, but he's in the second tier of Dominion, so it's a little easier to get higher Dominion strength. I think he pays for it by getting more expensive path access, I believe. And also, of course, like most rainbows, he's a very squishy chassis. This is not a god chassis that's going to inspire fear and awe in your opponents. But magic diversity is definitely an issue for early age Ermor, especially kind of the way that I play them, where I don't get that many flamens or maybe no flamens. So yeah, and generally like sacred cavalry and rainbow blesses mix pretty well. And this is I'm not a full rainbow here. I'm actually missing death, which is kind of an interesting choice, but you have pretty good death access with early age Ermor anyway, and since we don't really have great death income anyway, and the way that I tend to play, I tend to spend most of my death, we're probably not going to be casting any like the big death enchantments. So I just sort of figured that, well, and The Death Bless points are they're probably one of the least useful. And this is definitely focused. I mean, it's got multiple focuses, but the main focus is on making the Equite of the Sacred Shroud really good. This is probably like too much focus on the Equite of the Sacred Shroud. They're good, but I think, to play this nation the best, you probably wouldn't focus as heavily on them. And yeah, I kind of knew that, but I just like them. And considering that this is going to be a full house game, right, and with a tighter map, having stronger sacreds than normal isn't the craziest plan. So I do think that in this particular game, that's maybe stronger than normal, than you might see like in other games where you have a bit more space and you're less likely to get rushed. Early Age Ermor does have decent rush defense in the gladiators, but yeah, I mean, they do kind of struggle, I would say, a bit early on with super combatants and thugs. They do have good astral access on the battlefield, so once you get Soul Slay online, you have pretty decent defense in your mage core. But anyway, so what are we getting out of this? So we're getting decent access, right? Like air 3, water 3, earth 3, right? These are paths that like we don't really have, so we're gonna be able to do some site searching, and get ourselves like some gems in those, and we'll be able to like summon troll kings, and the water trolls. So I mean, we're pretty solid for diversity. We do have blood, but probably not really going to use that. We don't really have anything that we can use as blood hunters, so unless we get really lucky, and find some indies, probably not going to focus too much on blood. But again, this is mostly for Blood Surge, which is pretty good, on cavalry, right? Because Blood Surge only triggers when you get a kill, and because of the Lance Strike, your cavalry sacreds are much more likely to get kills. Really, the only time you run into trouble is if you're up against like giants, or a super combatant or something like that. Then Blood Surge is not so useful. But yeah, in terms of like the actual bless itself, maybe could have dropped some fire possibly. Superior morale, like, yeah, it is nice. Equite, they have decent morale, but, it never hurts to have a little bit of extra. I think, fire resistance on the Equite is a really good idea, especially because we're going heat 3, but also just because you do a lot of fire magic as Early Age Ermor, and they are, because a lot of the good spells in the air death cross path are in evocation. Making a strong push for evocation is a strong consideration, with Early Age Ermor. And, since you have a bunch of fire magic and you're going to be getting evocation anyway, you're going to be throwing a lot of fire spells out there, maybe summoning fire elementals. Like, there's going to be fire on the battlefield, so from yourself. And then, of course, fire it does a lot of damage, so against your opponents as well, it's useful to have fire resistance, but also because you're probably going to be hitting your own sacreds with fire. I think fire resistance is kind of a must. We also have major shock resistance, which is nice. We don't have to worry as much. We're not going to be doing as much friendly fire with air magic, but yeah, I mean, there's lots of air magic out there if you're going to be relying on your sacreds. Major shock, like, we could arguably take more, right? This is only 10, so it's going to help some, but certainly not going to completely protect them. If they get nailed with a thunderbolt direct, like, they're going to die. So yeah, some a decent amount of shock resistance, which is nice. Defense skill, always a strong consideration on Sacred Cavalry. Early Age Ermor's cavalry has like higher than normal defense, even for human cavalry. So I think this will bring them up to 20, which is approaching elf levels. It's still not quite as good as most elves, but you should be able to have like more cavalry generally than the elves. So yeah, defense skill is a strong consideration. This does leave us with a resistance hole. So if we're fighting in Cold Dominion against somebody that has like a lot of water magic, like that could be a problem. Water is probably like the least common, of like the elemental damage types. So, this is, I think, the most common hole to leave. But yeah, I mean, there are definitely some strong, water spells out there that you would want cold resistance for, and obviously, like Niflheim could be a problem. At least defensively, we are somewhat protected by the fact that we have full heat scales, so it's pretty much there's never going to be snow on the ground if we have our own Dominion down. So that's defensively, it's going to make a lot of the cold effects less bad, but it still could be a problem, so that's a consideration. Then use the earth points to pick up some extra strength. Like, strength is probably like the single best way to improve a unit's damage. There are the weapon blesses, and you can argue back and forth, of course, but if you really want to make your sacreds just kill stuff, give them a bunch of strength. Like, it's really effective. This is not a bunch of strength, right? It's just +2, and this is maybe an issue like with the build, I would say, overall, because we're kind of, it's focused on the sacreds, but this amount of strength doesn't quite get them to the point where they're going to be really killy, even against elites. So they definitely, they're going to absolutely destroy regular troops and independents, which is, again, somewhat, this build was from playing a bunch of single player. So this is extremely effective against the AI, but against humans, it could be a problem, because, this is, it's good, and especially with the lance strike, if they land that lance strike, that's going to be good. But after that, with the broadsword, they might struggle a bit to cut through some protection. But still, some strength, so that's good. Magic weapons, I think, is more or less a must on like a lot of sacreds. People the complain sometimes because just the meta is just always to get magic weapons. And certainly, because you're going to be going evocation, you could make an argument, to use these bless points for something else. And a mage bless, I think, is absolutely a consideration on Ermor, which is a little weird because they don't really have very many sacred mages, but you get a discount on an item, the Sacred Shroud, and so you can forge those extremely cheaply and just throw them on your mages. And so you can kind of end up having, and you have a lot of Astral Pearl income, which is what that costs, right? So, and oftentimes you tend to stack up a lot of Astral Pearls. So you could arguably take a Mage Bless with early age Ermor, which would be a little unusual, but anyway, you could use these Astral points for maybe like penetration would be nice, right? Because you're going to be doing a lot of Astral spells, and like you can get Farcaster with Astral as well, which is nice because you're going to be doing a lot of evocation. But if you're going to be focusing on the Equite, your regular troops, like from your normal troop lineup, you have no magic weapons, which can be a problem. If once you research some evocation, right, your fire magic and etc. can kind of stand in for your magic damage. But, there definitely are nations that you're going to run into, and, once more magic comes online, people will start to get, fire resistance and etc. So it is really nice, to have magic weapons, in case you run into something, and especially because this is an all-player game, like Therados is out there with, all their ethereal ghosts, so magic weapons is a strong consideration, I would say, really, on like any sacred that doesn't have magic weapons. And then I talked a little bit about Blood Surge. It's just a really powerful like combat buff. Like once they do Blood Surge, they're really scary. The only problem there is like if you're not actually getting that first kill, of course, like I talked about. And that is, I would say, another weakness a bit in terms of this build, specifically looking at the Equite. They don't actually have the greatest attack skill, and I haven't boosted their attack skill at all. So I would say that's a consideration, for any future builds that I would do for early age Ermor. But anyway, these guys expand really well with this. I think overall it's a solid bless for them. It has some problems, but yeah, it has worked out really well for me, certainly in single player, and definitely interested to see how it works out in multiplayer against real players. In terms of the build overall, like again, fairly rainbowy, not full rainbow, going dormant. So not going to have access to him right away, but going to get access relatively early, especially in a game this large, that's probably going to go long. Obviously, our god is not going to provide us any kind of defense. So, when he wakes up, he's not going to save us. So, really are going to be leaning on the equite and, maybe the gladiators if all goes poorly, if we get rushed. I would say that, a rush could be an issue, right? If we are next to somebody that hell blesses some really strong sacreds, we don't have a chance to get magic online. Like, gladiators are good, our sacreds are good, but it's still a little bit of a concern. This is maybe a little bit more of a greedier build than I've done in the past. So, but, again, like we do get good diversity out of this. The one nature, I just had some points left over. So definitely going to be doing some site searching with this guy. Like, I know that's something that people argue back and forth about whether or not it's worth doing. I don't know. I just think you haven't really lived in Dominions until you've experienced the joy of site searching with the Rainbow Pretender. You find so many sites. I don't know. It brings a smile to my face every time, and I love having gems. So definitely going to be doing some site searching with this guy. He's not super optimized in terms of having exactly like the right path access for like certain items and etc. I just don't have enough experience. So I'm sure that, I could play around with these paths a little bit, to kind of like hit certain spells and certain targets. Like, he's not really built with like a specific spell in mind or anything like that. With boosters, one of the other interesting things, he has 4 miscellaneous slots, which is double what you normally have. No arms, no arm slots. He does not, deign to hold anything. So it's an interesting chassis in that way, and I certainly haven't like optimized these paths, to take advantage of the fact that he can have like more slots, more miscellaneous slots than normal. So we'll see, as the game goes. He does have high enough astral that he can climb more or less all the way. I think we might have to give him like a copper arm. No, not for astral. Because he does have a head slot. So anyway, he's high enough astral that he can climb all the way. His astral is a bit low, so like magic duel is a problem. This is probably not a pretender that I'm looking to take into combat. Because I'd say, if you're going to bring him into combat against an astral nation, and there's enough astral independence out there that it's a concern. Like, anytime you put astral on your pretender, because magic duel is just such a nasty spell, you do have to think about that. Now, that said, we have enough astral mages that it's probably not cost effective. So I probably could actually take this guy into combat against astral nations, simply because just so long as I have a lot of my own mage core present, right? It's a random chance, like who's going to duel who. So, if you have enough dilution, it's going to be not very cost effective, but always a danger when you take kind of relatively low astral. If you bring him into combat, you do have to worry about magic duel. So yeah, not really looking at this pretender as like somebody that I'm going to be bringing into a lot of combat. Mostly looking at, again, providing a good bless, getting us into other paths like magic diversity and stuff like that, site searching and etc. So yeah. And then, yeah, our Dominion strength is decent, right? Like 6 is not fantastic. It's high enough that, we'll be able to get a good amount of equite. Certainly could be a little higher, in terms of they are sacred cavalry. So, it can be a little bit difficult depending on your spawn location, to get a bunch of cavalry. But yeah, we are usually not constrained by this, certainly not in the early game. But, it's also, it's not strength 10 or something, so we're not going to pump out like a ton of our equite. And then the scales themselves, I think really the biggest problem, probably with the build overall, magic, I don't have magic scales. And I think early age Ermor, because they're a really heavy fire nation and they have just a bunch of mages, they can get some insane research because they can forge a ton of lightless lanterns, and then they have a bunch of pretty efficient mages to throw them onto. So if you include like magic 3 on top of that, you can get some really insane research, and obviously like I'm not taking advantage of that at all. So, I would say that, and especially like in a long game and a big game like this, I think one of, early age Ermor's greatest strengths is like the fact that they can, research really fast. And I'm not really taking advantage of that as much. I'm still planning on doing lightless lanterns and etc. But yeah, I think magic scales is a very strong consideration on early age Ermor, and it's just something I haven't, just kind of undervalue, really. When you're playing against the computer, you have more time. So I think I just still haven't like adjusted. But yeah, I would say if I was going to do another early age Ermor build, this would probably change. I think Misfortune, is early age Ermor in vanilla has pretty terrible heroes. So, you don't have to worry about not getting your heroes. Like, they kind of suck anyway. And then you have a bunch of fortune tellers, so you can mitigate a lot of the worst effects of Misfortune. Yeah, if you hate, like, don't get me wrong, constant barbarian attacks definitely drives me a little crazy too sometimes. But I think, you have enough other stuff that you want to use points for that, you should probably go down into Misfortune. I've only gone down to 2, 3 sucks extra worse. Probably if I was going to do another build, I might roll 3 and get, to help with my magic scales, and so I have to cut less off the Sacred Shroud. Bless. Growth 3, I think it's a really important income scale in a game this big. I think, yeah, that's a strong pick. Like I said, early age Ermor does want scales. Heat 3, everybody says, I don't know, everybody, it's very common to recommend tanking your temperature scales. And I there are a lot of reasons to do it. I will say it is actually a pretty big hit to income. And then the other thing too is that your mages actually pick up a lot of extra fatigue, from like the extra heat scales if you don't have, fire resistance. Now we do have that on our bless, but, we don't actually have sacred mages. So unless we're putting shrouds on them, it's kind of a problem. Then when you add like the old age in, I don't know. I'm not sure how like big of an effect it is, because it is still dwarfed by like the actual fatigue that you're getting off of a spell. But you are going to be running communions as early age Ermor. So like managing long-term fatigue is perhaps more of a concern, and it is a big hit to your income. So I've gone full heat. The advantage to that, of course, again, we want to do a lot of fire magic. Like, I think probably on the balance, it is still worth it for early age Ermor because you're focused, like, to an extent on fire magic. And of course, like, Niflheim is out there in the early age always. So we'll see if we spawn near Niflheim. Hopefully not, but if we do, we're going to be somewhat protected against the frost giants. So anyway, the other thing too, of course, I talked about like the 18 map move and how mobility is a strength of early age Ermor. They don't have snow move, right? So if there's snow on the ground, you lose that advantage. And of course, going heavy in the heat means that you retain that advantage even in winter in your own dominion. So I do think on the balance, for early age Ermor, like Heat 3 is probably worth it. And again, you have enough other things that you want to be doing with your design points that, yeah, it's probably worth tanking that. But yeah, I don't know. I'm starting to think that maybe it's not as much of an... I used to just think of it as like, yeah, just always like tank into heat or cold. And certainly there are plenty of people who recommend that. But yeah, I'm kind of starting to question that and interested to try some builds where I don't do that. And then, yeah, I think a little bit of order, a little bit of production. Your troops do require more resources than average and a bit more recruitment than average as well. So I think like as much like productivity and order that you can fit into the build as possible would be good. So yeah, full productivity would be nice. Again, like early age Ermor absolutely can be played like full scales because your Auger elders like are so good. It's like you want a bunch of infrastructure so you can pump them out of as many forts as possible, and they're fairly expensive. So if you have a ton of gold, then you can pump a ton of those guys out, and your troops are good enough that like you can recruit a bunch of them. So yeah, full scales is absolutely an argument to be made for that. We're not full scales, but we haven't completely sacrificed scales, for a fairly strong bless. And then, also we're only dormant. So, we're going to be able to pop in and, do some site searching and actually break us into some other paths of magic and etc. So yeah, that's kind of the build, that's the idea, and yeah, should be interesting.